The knock at midnight rain poured down like silver threads over the colony world of Lunaris 9. The streets were dark, wet, and silent, except for the hum of power lines and the whisper of wind. Inside a small workshop on the edge of the city, a man sat alone beside a flickering lamp. His name was Ethan Ward, a former engineer who had once built ships that touched the stars. Now he repaired broken drones for people who never remembered his name. He had learned to live quietly, far from war and noise. But on that cold night, the universe came knocking on his door. The first knock was soft. He thought it was the wind. The second was louder, slow, hesitant, like someone afraid of being heard. Ethan frowned, put down his tools, and opened the door. There, in the rain, stood a small alien girl, no older than 10 human years. Her skin shimmered faint lavender under the streetlights, her eyes wide and glassy like polished stone. She wore a thin cloak torn at the edges, soaked through from the storm. Her bare feet were blue from cold. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't send me away." Ethan blinked, confused. "Who are you?" he asked. She clutched a small metal pendant to her chest and said, "My name is Lyra." Her voice cracked. "I don't have a home." He looked around. No one else was there. No ship, no guardian, only her tiny figure trembling in the rain. "Where are your parents?" he asked softly. Lyra shook her head, her silver hair sticking to her cheeks. "My father was human," she said, "but he died." Her lip quivered. "My stepmother said I don't belong." Ethan's heart sank. He saw the bruises along her arms, the fear in her eyes. Without another word, he stepped aside. "Get in here before you freeze," he said. She hesitated, looking at him with disbelief. No one had spoken kindly to her in days, but she stepped inside, dripping water onto the floor. The warmth of the heater filled the small room, and she shivered as it touched her skin. Ethan handed her a blanket and a mug of hot tea. She stared at the steam like it was magic. He sat opposite her, trying to find words. "So," he said quietly, "your stepmother kicked you out." Lyra nodded, her eyes down. "She said I was a mistake," she whispered. "She said humans bring only trouble." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had heard that tone before. Not hatred, but fear wearing its mask. Lyra drank slowly, her hands trembling. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." The rain outside grew heavier. He looked at the clock. 02:17 a.m. He could send her to the city shelter, but deep down he knew what would happen there. Mixed species children were often turned away, or worse, sold to labs that studied alien DNA. Ethan stood and said, "You can stay here tonight." Lyra's eyes widened. "Really?" "Just tonight," he said quickly, "until the storm passes." She smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Later, while she slept on the couch wrapped in his blanket, Ethan sat awake beside the window. He stared at the pendant she had placed on the table. It wasn't jewelry. It was a small data crystal, glowing faint blue. He turned it over in his hand and saw a strange symbol. A spiral surrounded by stars. It wasn't from any human world he knew. When he touched it, the crystal flickered, projecting a faint hologram. A man's voice played. "Calm, deep, human. If you find her, please keep her safe. She carries something the galaxy cannot lose." Then the image vanished, leaving only silence and the sound of rain. Ethan sat frozen, the words echoing in his mind. He looked at the sleeping girl, her hair glowing faintly in the dim light. "Who are you really, kid?" he whispered, but she didn't answer, just turned slightly in her sleep, a small smile on her lips. The storm lasted through the night. By dawn, the streets were covered in mist, and the city's lights glowed dim through the fog. Ethan made breakfast, simple bread and warm milk. Lyra sat at the table quietly, her feet swinging above the floor. "Do you like it?" he asked. She nodded, chewing carefully. After a moment, she looked at him, her voice small. "Mr. Ethan," she said, "can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Sure." Her eyes filled with tears. "Will you be my dad?" she whispered. "I won't misbehave." The room went silent. Ethan froze, spoon still in his hand. He hadn't heard that word. Dad. In years, he looked at her, this little stranger from another world, and for the first time since the war, his heart ached. He sighed and set the spoon down. "Lyra," he said quietly, "I'm not good at that kind of thing." She stared at him, not blinking. "I can help," she said quickly. "I can clean, I can cook, I can stay out of the way." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "I don't want to be alone again." Ethan exhaled slowly. He had spent his life fixing machines, broken things made of metal and wire. But now, sitting across from this child, he realized something. She wasn't the one who needed fixing. He was. He stood, walked to her, and placed a hand on her head. "All right, kid," he said softly. "You can stay." Lyra looked up, hope shining in her eyes. "Really?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said. "But you listen to me, okay? No running off, no secrets." She nodded eagerly. "I promise." Outside, the clouds began to clear. The morning light fell across the metal towers of the city, and somewhere in that light, a story had begun. A human who had lost everything, and an alien child who would soon teach him what family really meant. The secret inside the pendant. The city of Lunaris 9 never truly slept. Its towers hummed with light, its sky filled with drifting drones that blinked like fireflies. But inside Ethan Ward's small workshop, time stood still. He sat at his workbench, the alien pendant glowing softly beside him. Lyra was asleep again, curled up under a blanket on the couch. Her breathing was calm now, no longer haunted by fear. Ethan stared at the pendant, unsure whether to be curious or afraid. He turned it over in his hand. The same faint symbol glowed, a spiral wrapped in stars. His engineer's mind itched to understand. "This isn't a toy," he muttered. "It's a data core, or something far more advanced." He tapped the device gently, and it responded, flickering to life. A voice echoed, calm, warm, human. "If you are hearing this, you have found my daughter." Ethan froze, his heart thudding in his chest. The voice continued, "Her name is Lyra Ward. She carries a code that must never fall into the wrong hands. Protect her, and she will one day protect you all." The message ended, leaving only silence and the faint hum of the machines. Ethan stared at the pendant, his breath shallow. "Ward," he whispered. He said Ward, his last name. He turned sharply toward the couch, staring at the sleeping girl. "Lyra Ward," he repeated quietly. "What are you to me?" Morning light began to break through the clouds. Spilling into the room, Ethan made coffee, trying to calm the storm inside his head. When Lyra woke, she rubbed her eyes and smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. He smiled back, though his mind was spinning. "Morning, kid," he said. "We need to talk." She tilted her head, curious. He placed the pendant on the table. "Where did you get this?" Her smile faded instantly. Her hands trembled. "My father gave it to me," she whispered. He said, "Never let anyone take it." Ethan leaned forward. "Do you know what's inside?" Lyra shook her head. "No," she said. "He said I wasn't ready." Her voice broke. "But they came for it. My stepmother. And the soldiers. They said it belonged to the Empire." Tears filled her eyes. "They said I was dangerous because I had human blood." Ethan's stomach twisted. He sat back slowly, staring at her. "Kid," he said quietly, "you're not dangerous. You're just caught in the middle of other people's fear." But even as he said it, the pendant pulsed again. The light grew brighter, projecting a new hologram. Not a voice this time, but a map. Stars filled the room, spinning slowly in midair. Lines connected them. A network of glowing dots spreading across the galaxy. At the center, a mark burned bright red. Lyra gasped. "That's where they're hiding." Ethan frowned. "Who?" "The ones who made the machines," she said, her eyes glowing faintly with the reflection. "They were supposed to protect life. But they turned on us." Ethan studied the map. Dozens of planets, some known, some erased from human charts. This wasn't just data, it was a memory. One the galaxy had tried to forget. And somehow, it was inside a child. The workshop lights flickered suddenly. The AI system in the wall came to life. "Warning," it said. "Unidentified surveillance detected nearby." Ethan's heart jumped. "Who is it?" he asked. Multiple life signs approaching the building. He ran to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Dark figures moved through the fog. Tall, armored, and silent, not human soldiers. These were hunters, their armor black with glowing blue lines. Synthetic mercs, built to retrieve stolen tech. Ethan turned to Lyra. "We have to go." She clutched the pendant tightly. "They found us," she whispered. "How?" "They can track the code," she said, her voice shaking. "The pendant isn't just a key. It's alive." The door rattled. A voice echoed from outside. Cold and metallic. "Surrender the child. Human. You are harboring illegal biosynthetic property of the Empire." Lyra's eyes filled with terror. "Property?" Ethan growled. "She's a kid." The wall cracked as one of the mercs struck it with a plasma blade. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her toward the back exit. "Move!" he shouted. They ran through the narrow alley behind the shop. The rain was still falling, lightning flashing across the distant towers. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning the ground with beams of white light. Ethan led her into an old transport tunnel, dark and echoing. His heart pounded in his chest. "Why are they calling you property?" he asked, panting. Lyra's voice was trembling. "Because I was made to be perfect," she said softly. "Part human, part Ellerin, part machine." He stopped dead in his tracks. "What?" She looked up at him, tears shining in her violet eyes. "My father built me to save life. But they said I was an abomination." Before Ethan could answer, the tunnel behind them exploded. Flames and smoke filled the air, the hunters closing in fast. He gritted his teeth, pulling her close. "Hold on tight," he said. He hit a switch on his wristband, and the old service transport roared to life. The floor shook as the small rail vehicle shot forward, disappearing into the dark. Behind them, the hunters' voices echoed through the tunnel. "Find them! The hybrid cannot be allowed to survive." Ethan held Lyra close, his jaw set. "You're safe with me, kid," he said, his voice firm. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The pendant wasn't just a message, it was a warning, and the entire galaxy was already listening. The truth of the hybrid child. The transport roared through the abandoned tunnels beneath Lunaris 9. Sparks flashed from the rails, and dust filled the air. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, his eyes fixed on the dim light ahead. Behind them, the sound of pursuit still echoed, cold, mechanical, and relentless. Lyra sat beside him, clutching the glowing pendant to her chest. Her small body trembled, her face pale under the faint blue light. Ethan looked at her, his voice rough but calm. "Hang on, kid. We're almost clear." The old transport broke through the final tunnel, bursting into open air. The city lights stretched below them, a sea of neon and smoke. They had emerged onto an elevated maintenance track that ran across the industrial district. The night sky glowed faint purple, heavy with storm clouds. But before Ethan could breathe, a shadow moved above. 2 hunter drones swooped down. their engines screaming. Lyra gasped. "They found us again!" Ethan cursed under his breath, jerking the controls. The transport swerved hard as a plasma bolt struck the rail. Sparks raining down, he pressed a button on the console, activating the manual override. The old engines howled, flames shooting from the rear exhaust. "Hold on!" he shouted. The transport surged forward. Racing toward the edge of the city, the drones followed, firing bursts of light that scorched the metal around them. Lyra covered her ears, crying out as the noise filled the air. Ethan reached over, wrapping one arm protectively around her. "I won't let them take you," he growled. Moments later, the transport leapt off the broken end of the track, flying through the air. For a second, everything was silent. Then they crashed into the rooftop of a cargo station. Metal groaned and bent under the impact. Ethan rolled, shielding Lyra as debris scattered around them. When the noise faded, he groaned, pushing himself up. "You okay?" he asked. Lyra nodded weakly. Still clutching the pendant, he smiled faintly. "Good, because we're running again." They slipped down a maintenance ladder, disappearing into the lower sectors. Neon signs flickered overhead, and the smell of oil and rain filled the air. Here, among the broken machines and forgotten people, they could hide, for now. Ethan led her into an abandoned docking bay, a place where old ships waited for scrapping. The silence inside was heavy, only broken by the hum of generators that still clung to life. He set up a small fire, the flames reflecting in Lyra's violet eyes. She sat quietly, staring at the pendant, her voice small and trembling. "Why do they want me so badly?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the pendant, at the faint star map still glowing faintly in its center. He sighed. "Because whatever your father built into you," he said softly, "something they can't control." Lyra's eyes shimmered with tears. "My stepmother said I was a mistake," she whispered. "She said humans ruin everything they touch." Ethan stared at her, his voice calm but firm. "She's wrong," he said. "You're proof of what happens when two worlds try to understand each other." He reached out, brushing the dust from her hair. "You're not a mistake, Lyra," he said. "You're a miracle." For a moment, she just stared at him, then smiled, a small, fragile smile that made his chest tighten. Before they could speak again, the air flickered. A faint blue shimmer surrounded the pendant. It pulsed once, then twice. Before projecting an image into the air, a man appeared, human, tall, calm-eyed, with streaks of grey in his hair. Lyra gasped. "That's him. Your father?" Ethan asked. She nodded quickly. "Yes," the hologram spoke, his voice full of warmth. "If you are hearing this, my daughter, it means I am gone. The code within you is the final legacy of Project Luma. You carry the seed of creation, the power to rebuild what war destroyed." Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. Project Luma, a myth whispered among engineers, a human experiment said to create living energy capable of healing planets. "Your father," Ethan said slowly, "he didn't just build machines. He built life." The hologram flickered, showing images of destroyed worlds turning green again. Forests rising, oceans cleansing, skies clearing. But the Empire wanted to use it for control. The man's voice continued. "So I hid the code in you. In your DNA." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. He made me part of it." Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "You're not just part of it, kid. You are it." Before the message could end, and static filled the air. Interference. Ethan turned sharply toward the entrance. His sensors blinked red. Movement. He stood, grabbing his rifle. "They found us again," he hissed. Lyra clutched the pendant, its light growing brighter. The door burst open. 3 armored hunters stepped inside, weapons glowing. "Stay behind me," Ethan said, leveling his rifle. The first blast hit the wall beside them. Scattering debris, Lyra screamed, her fear triggering something inside her. The pendant flared to life. A wave of light exploded outward. The machines froze mid-step, their armor crackling with golden sparks. Ethan shielded his eyes as the room filled with radiant energy. When the light faded, the hunters were gone, vaporized. The walls glowed faintly, covered in strange flowing symbols. Lyra stared at her hands, glowing faintly with the same light. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, shaking. Ethan knelt in front of her, his voice steady. "It's all right. Kid, you didn't destroy," he said. "You protected." She looked at him with wide eyes. "They'll never stop, will they?" He sighed, glancing out the window at the rising dawn. "No," he said quietly. "But now I know what they're afraid of." "What?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Hope," he said. "That's what scares them the most." Outside, the city of Lunaris began to glow with morning light, and somewhere deep beneath its towers, the pendant pulsed again, whispering through hidden networks and silent machines. The code of life had awakened, and the galaxy was beginning to listen. The light that changed the galaxy, the first sunrise over Lunaris 9, cut through the storm clouds like a blade of gold. For the first time in years, the city looked peaceful, glowing in quiet light. But beneath the beauty, the world was trembling, because the code inside a little girl had begun to awaken. Ethan Ward stood at the edge of the old docking bay. Watching the horizon, Lyra sat beside him, the pendant floating softly in the air, pulsing like a heartbeat. He had seen her powers twice now, enough to know it was no accident. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was the key to something far greater. "I can feel them," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. Ethan looked down at her. "Feel who?" "The machines," she whispered. "The ones hunting us. They're changing." Her eyes glowed faint blue, like reflections of a starry sky. Ethan frowned, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Changing how?" Lyra hesitated. "They're afraid," she said. "They're remembering." Before he could respond, the sky cracked open. Dozens of ships broke through the clouds. Massive, black, and silent. The insignia of the Empire burned red on their hulls. They had come for her. Ethan stepped forward, jaw tight. "So much for peace," he muttered. The pendant's glow brightened, filling the air with waves of energy. Static danced across the metal floor, the wind shifting around them. Ethan looked at Lyra. "Can you control it?" She shook her head. "No, it's controlling me." He knelt beside her, placing both hands on her shoulders. "Hey, listen to me," he said gently. "You're not a weapon. You get to choose what you are." Tears welled in her eyes. "But if I use it, I might hurt people," she said. Ethan nodded slowly. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe you'll save them." The ships began to descend, engines roaring like thunder from their bellies. Hundreds of armored soldiers emerged, marching, cold, precise. The ground trembled under their boots. Loudspeakers crackled to life. "Surrender the hybrid child," the commander's voice echoed. "And you will not be harmed." Ethan smiled grimly. "They always say that," he muttered. He turned to Lyra. "Stay behind me." She clutched the pendant tightly, the glow now blinding. "I can stop them," she whispered. "I know you can," he said. But not with hate. The soldiers raised their weapons, their visors reflecting the golden light. The commander shouted, "Fire!" A storm of energy bolts filled the air, burning through smoke and dust. But before they could reach them, the light around Lyra exploded outward. It wasn't fire. It wasn't destruction. It was creation. The shockwave expanded across the city. Not tearing, but healing. The buildings repaired themselves. The air cleared. The rain turned to mist that shimmered like glass. The soldiers froze mid-attack, their weapons lowering. Their armor flickered, revealing faces, human, alien, machine, all glowing softly with the same golden light. Inside the Imperial ship, alarms blared. The commander tried to speak, but his voice failed. Every screen aboard his vessel displayed the same message. Project Luma, activated. Across the galaxy, machines that had been sleeping for centuries woke with a hum. From forgotten planets to drifting space stations, old lights flickered back to life. The code within Lyra spread through the stars, rewriting what the war had broken. It was no longer a weapon. It was life. Ethan shielded his eyes as the last of the light faded. When he looked around, the battlefield was gone. Where there had been soldiers, there were people, confused, dazed, alive. The ships hovered silently, their weapons powered down. Lyra stood in the center of the clearing, her eyes glowing softly. The pendant floated above her palm, spinning slowly before fading into dust. She looked at Ethan, exhausted but smiling. "It's done," she said weakly. He caught her as she stumbled, holding her close. "You did it," he whispered. "You changed everything." The commander of the Imperial forces approached slowly, no longer armored, no longer cold. He removed his helmet and fell to one knee. "We were blind," he said quietly. "She showed us the truth." Ethan stared at him, disbelief mixing with relief. What truth? The commander looked up, eyes glowing faint gold. "That the future doesn't belong to fear," he said. "It belongs to those who feel." Hours later, the city was reborn. The once dead towers now glowed with green vines and flowing streams of water. Machines worked beside humans, rebuilding what had been lost. Lyra slept peacefully under the rising sun, her energy finally still. Ethan stood beside her, watching the horizon where the Empire ships now drifted away. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel broken. He felt human. Sira Ven, one of the Ellerin envoys who had come after the light event, stood beside him. "She's not just a child," she said softly. "She's evolution." Ethan nodded. "Yeah," he said. "But to me, she's just my kid." The wind carried their laughter through the streets as dawn touched the city once more. And somewhere far above, in the dark of space, the machines that once hunted humanity whispered through their networks. The hybrid lives. The light remembers. Hope is human. The war was over. Not because someone won, but because a frightened little girl asked a broken man to be her dad, and he said yes.